but maybe a week, maybe a day, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 10 years. I might look back and see why it happened, and I'll look at that and I'll know why. And it did work out for the best, even though I might have thought, man, we're in a heap of trouble. We're in a heap of trouble worldwide. We're in a heap of trouble in our country. We're in a heap of trouble in our state of California, in our local governments. But as I said, there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm sitting in the checkout line at the Home Depot, and I usually have my notifications and that beep and buzzer on the phone turned off, but I happen to have it on, and it beeps. There's a couple people in line, so I click on it, and constitutional attorney, which you've heard on the show many times, Mark Moisier, was doing a live broadcast. So I said, well, since I'm sitting here, I'll just flip this on. And within about a minute, I'm posting, who is this guy? On this that I'm hearing, well, the person you're about is the guy I was watching this morning. You're about to meet him, I think, in Southern California and around the world, probably for the first time. He's third supervisor from San Benito County, business owner, and this guy has guts, and I think you'll agree with me after hearing this. Peter Hernandez, welcome to IE Newswire with Roy.
How you doing, Roy? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I can't tell you how. I mean, within a minute of listening to you today, while Mark Moisier was interviewing you, I'm thinking, this guy, we've got to get this guy's message out. Give them just a little snippet about how you came to be a supervisor in San Benito County, and then we'll get into why I said this guy has guts. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Roy. So hopefully, let me clear my head a bit, because I know that I'll try to create the long version into a short version. Long and short, I felt it definitely a conviction and a call from God, completely disconnected from technically politics. But I was at a place where I was struggling in my faith, trying to, and ultimately, I remember listening to a message one day when I was at service, and the pastor spoke and said, if you don't, and it's funny because it wasn't specific to politics, but the message to me was, if you don't step up and do what God's called you to do, it's funny because I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, wow, I never thought that politics was going to be a calling. But nonetheless, if you don't step up and do what God's called you to do, someone's going to take your place. So the snippets in time throughout that time up until today when I'm a supervisor, so I basically, and I actually forgot to mention to you, I actually reached out to my pastor asking for support, ultimately trying to get prayed over and get direction about getting involved in running for office. But it's funny because that was the ongoing conversation. In the meantime, I actually started showing up to, I basically knocked on the door of the probation department. It was the weirdest thing. I just felt like, okay, I'm going to knock on this window and I'm going to ask if they need volunteers. And the lady, probation supervisor said, Peter, so why are you here? And I said, well, I want to volunteer. Well, what's your goals with volunteering? I said, honestly, ma'am, it's just I feel like a call from God for me to get involved in government. So she said, okay, and did a background check, everything cleared. Ultimately, they had me volunteering. I started initially filing paperwork. Before you know it, I ended up becoming the guy that was doing drug tests. Again, it was all volunteer. I had bread hours. I was working full time, have a family. If anybody that knows the bread industry, you're working Sundays and your days off are Sundays and Wednesdays, and the rest of the week, the 5 days you're working. So Wednesdays was my day off. I just showed up every Wednesday, like clockwork, 8 hours. Put about 5 years in. I never, again, still at that point, I still wasn't even considering politics as a reality that God called me to. But at the end of the day, 2008 came, AB 109 hit. The prison system was basically overwhelmed. And I know that was one of the issues, but the other big issue was the state was in a fiscal tailspin financially, so they had to figure out what it meant to cut costs. And that was one of the Jerry Brown's ideas, was basically to do these three non-violent, non-sexual, non-serious offenders and releasing them into the local communities the thing that a lot of people didn't realize, the average public, I guess, I would say, is they didn't know that meant that the responsibility was going to be put on the public, on the local government. So we, and I was part of probation, so here we are scrambling, figuring out what it means to address these 8109 cases into our community, and they obviously cut a bunch of costs, right, because they're downsizing the population, the prison population back in 2000. I can't remember if it was 2009 or right around 2008. But anyway, so I ended up having the chief of probation, who's actually a man of faith, who knew I was a man of faith, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Peter, do you want to help us with this program? We're dealing with basically now these AB 109 cases, so we're considering doing an adult review board and a juvenile review board, completely volunteer." I went through that whole process of volunteering, of supporting this program. It was a really awesome opportunity to see the inner workings of government, a lot more engaged, having a little bit of a sense of responsibility. Fast forward, we ended up having an 80% non-recidivism rate. Basically, we had very little turnaround when we dealt with these youth. They ended up not reoffending. Little by little, I started basically from that. I felt like I was starting to get to know the probation officers. To that extent, I was getting to know the leadership in our community, from elected officials all across the gambit. And I started getting involved in other things locally, right? Political things. And it was more for me to ultimately dig into the understanding kind of the inner workings, like I said, and God put it on my heart to really want to know, if you want to know the enemy, you got to know the camp. And I hate to put it that way, but it's just the reality. If you want to know the inner workings of how government works, at least a government that's beyond its authority, you got to get involved. So I actually started doing some homework, learning about the founding, learning about the Constitution. Again, still not thinking about running for office. All that to be said is I found myself really just questioning with all the chaos that's happening, I just felt really compelled that I can't complain about the issues in our communities if I'm not part of the solution. So I know being basically sitting on the benches is not the way to do it, right? You got to get into the game. So long and short, I started getting involved with the local Republican Party. I eventually became chair of the Republican Party, and that was one of the things that I had asked leadership and said, "Hey, Rob Bernofsky, which was a local leader in our community, he's still very involved." I asked him, "What would you think if I decided to run for office?" And he said, "We'd fully support you." I considered basically I wanted to barely get my feet wet, and I ran for school board. Didn't know I was going to win. I ended up winning. Served 4 years. Kind of understood a little bit more of the lingo, the language of government. A lot of acronyms and trying to generalize ultimately and beat the public to death with a lot of information that's very hard to digest. So serving 4 years after that, I ended up, I felt the calling now to get more involved at a higher office, and that's when I ran for County Board of Supervisors. Again, totally felt God-led. I'm doing a lot of homework. I would say it's funny because I found myself gaining a lot of wisdom. And if anybody wants to grow their faith, get into office, because you will find yourself as a Christian being challenged a whole lot and reading your scriptures a whole lot more and praying a whole lot more. Sure enough, that's what happened. I grew in my faith, and I ended up growing in influence by God's grace. Now fast forward to today, and ultimately that was one of the convictions as I basically spoken on the dais in front of people in meetings, to cut to the chase, speak directly to the audience, obviously being respectful with my the way that I would articulate my message to the public, but doing it in a way that didn't dance around the words. And ultimately my goal was to restore integrity, as God called me to do, restore integrity and what it means to be a public servant. So I would apply the Constitution in my dialogue. If anybody watches the meetings, they see that I try my best to bring it up and influence, ultimately, and to a certain extent, encourage the board that I'm on and any other board that I've been on for committees to say, we got to reference the very thing that gives us authority, that ultimately represents the public's interest, which is our Constitution. So I try to get as to the point as possible. Hopefully, if I missed anything.
Yeah, I want to pick it up there. We'll get to our corrupt school system in a minute. For you, originally went on the school board. Now you're a supervisor, elected in 14 to the school board, 18 to the San Benito County Supervisor's Office. I didn't ask you this before, but I'm willing to bet. I bet you are a Trump supporter.
100%.
I figured that as much on that. And I'm going to get to the crux of why we're going to kind of back up, and then hopefully we'll have some time to do in the schools. But I'm watching the Mark Moisier video this morning. He's interviewing Richard, I know a guy named Richard Hernandez, so if I do that to you, I do that. Peter Hernandez, that he's sitting at his establishment, Ohana Shaved Ice, up in Hollister, California, and this interview's going on, and this guy's saying exactly what he's talking about. These, as I call them, these odious city managers, CEOs, that whitewash and duck over and just snowball our elected officials. And this guy's saying, they weren't pulling that crap on me. I'm paraphrasing of that. But it goes to the coronavirus stuff. And the county health official up in San Benito County was doing some stuff that I believe Peter didn't think was right or was not part of the science of that. He questioned it. To give them a synopsis and tell them what happened next after you confronted the San Benito County health official. Go, Peter Hernandez.
So basically, I challenged him on the dais. I asked my fellow board members, ultimately because he was very disconnected through this legislative process, me emphasizing my authority according to the Constitution to really legislate. That's my job, not his, right? He can write public health orders, but he cannot write legislative policy, right? So to the point, I asked my fellow board members is if he's not willing to acknowledge that relationship that matters, that we are the ones that set policy, not him, and that he gives us his input. I'm not against, obviously, a public health doctor, especially with the virus. I'm not anti-vax, anti-science. I mean, the bottom line is it's logistically accurate to say, you work with us, we are the ultimate authority, we'll implement what we feel is best according to the authority given to us by the people that elected us. He didn't like it. Everything that I challenged him on, he basically had a zero answer to it. 2 hours later, he texted my CAO and he quit.
As I told Peter when I talked to him this afternoon, I'm going to get a hold of Dr. Kelly Victory, Dr. Jeff Barkey, Dr. Robert Malone, and our crew of experts on here. We are going to clone Richard Hernandez and put him in every political office Peter Hernandez. I told you I'd do that. Peter Hernandez from every office from California to Vermont, because this guy understands what his job is. He is representing the people, and he understands he is the voice of the people. He is not there to be dictated by the staff, the pretty much millionaires that run our government, called CEOs, city managers, and the director of the roads and everything else of this, on and on. No, he's there to represent the people. He's the one that's holding the purse strings. He's the one that ultimately you have a vote. You are the one that you and your other 3 votes on that board, I think there's probably 5 supervisors, control what's going on. Those guys are just there to carry out the policy that you guys set out. And if you guys set out a policy that says, we ain't playing Gulag Gavin's game or whatever, you are up there to direct them to do that. And if they don't do that, then you fire them and get somebody else in there that does. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. Yeah, it's funny, and I forgot to mention to you also, which is, we had a short brief period of time to talk, but nonetheless, I brought forward a Healthy Communities resolution that the northern counties, north of me, had, we're in the Central Coast, that had proposed and successfully enacted. At the end of the day, the Healthy Communities resolution says, yes, we'll address this virus. Yes, we'll figure out ultimately how to protect public health, but no, we're not going to do it according to the state's expectations. We're going to do it according to our needs. We're going to know our community better than you are, state, so thank you, but no thank you. We're going to do our job and implement some kind of a process that is very limited in scope as far as any kind of mandates. We're going to work with the people. Probably more than likely, it's just coming up with a process that was going to end up giving people the choice, but nonetheless, it was going to put us in a relationship position as it was intended and make sure that the community was, 1, protected, but also 2, wasn't, that we didn't break down or weaken the strength of the Constitution in our community.
All I can say is hot damn. I mean, like I said, and this is all it takes. This was just one guy. I mean, he didn't even have to have 3 votes. He challenged the health director. The health director, 2 hours later, ran but with his tail between his legs. This goes, imagine, and I've said this, the most powerful source, and Peter could probably attest to this, the thing the politicians fear most is 1, 10, or 100 constituents showing up at a meeting. I've seen them change in a heartbeat. They can go along with this. People show up on that. And it starts with one thing like this. We only have a couple minutes left in this segment, and I want to just touch on that because you were a school board member of that. Just give them a little synopsis and tell people know my take on this. I've been saying for decades the California public school system is corrupt as hell. You've been on the inside. Give them about a 2-minute take on what you saw on the inside as a school board member. Go, Peter.
So it's funny because I was getting my refresher course a little bit through the Federalist Papers. But the bottom line, one of the things that the founders had intended was to prevent factions, which is basically a minority that had a very specific focus themselves, right? Which is, in that sense, it's understandable, but nonetheless, it's our job not to allow a faction to a certain extent or a group to dominate the needs of the whole, right? You cannot have one group clearly articulate the needs of the whole. So bottom line is I love teachers. I don't like teachers' unions. I've never been supported by the union. I actually went after my business. They sent me a letter saying we're going to boycott your business if you don't. Ultimately because I didn't support a raise, which that's a whole other conversation to be had. So basically, the teachers' union. I'm against teachers' unions, not necessarily teachers, and only because they're so special interest. They dilute the education, they weaken academic rigor, and by default, they create just bad outcomes, right? The child should be successful. We spend the most amount of money, I believe, in the rest of the nation in per ADA, basically per capita. We spend the most amount of money per student, yet we get the lowest outcome, and we're basically not getting the return on investment that our children deserve.
Man, like I said, things happen for a reason. The events that transpired today happened for a reason. And, I'm going to do everything in my power to make this guy not only a local legend, but maybe a statewide or national legend across us. Because all I can say is hallelujah when I hear a elected representative mention the Federalist Papers. I know this guy knows what's going on, and you know what? I know if he is my elected representative, I know I can sleep at night because I know he's not selling me under the workbench while I'm not looking, because he knows what's right. Again, Peter, we're going to do this again real soon, probably next week, on that in a continuing basis, as long as you're willing. And like I said, man, and I even, the more I talk to you, the more impressed I am with you on that. Thanks for being on. And if you're up there, what's your business? If somebody's up in Hollister, California, and they want some shaved ice, tell them where to go.
It's Ohana Shave Ice, San Benito Street. If you just Google Ohana Shave Ice in Hollister, you'll find it pretty easy.
And you might even see Richard by there and give him a bit. Maybe buy him a shaved ice from his own place. We're going to do this.
Sure.
We're going to do this again. Thanks for being on. I really enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Roy. Thank you for this time. And God bless you all. And, God bless America. I mean, this is worth fighting for.
It is. That's a third supervisor currently in San Benito County and Trump supporter, reader of the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, and just all-around good guy, Peter Hernandez. Like I said, we're going to make this guy a superstar. This guy needs to be the voice, voice. Like I said, I think he needs to be a voice, either 1 or 1A, throughout the state of California on this, and we're going to aim to make that happen on that. Man, it's been one heck of a day of that. Hey, one heck of a show, I think, going on for that. We went through the stuff. We've got, again, 7.5 days left to get those ballots in. Jesse, you have no excuses. You can still register to vote at any polling place on September 14th and vote in the recall election. No, you're not. So, but that is because there's been some posts going on, and it's not a it's not a certain of that. This is just at least in Riverside County. You cannot, or if you're not registered to vote, you're kind of in limbo from last August 30 when they cut off the 15-day deadline. But you can register at the Registrar's of Voters office or any polling place in the state of California. They should have Register of Voters forms at any polling place across the state. You can cast a provisional ballot, and your vote will count if all the information's correct, and you're not lying, and you're not a convicted felon and stuff, and you're eligible to vote. Your vote will be counted, but you still, if you're not registered to vote, just wanted to say, at least in Riverside County, September 14th is the day. Find a polling place. You can look it up in Riverside County. That's voteinfo.net, www.voteinfo.net. You can you can find a polling place. You can find one. There's going to be one near you. There's probably half a dozen of them in Moreno Valley, California. They'll be up and down the state. So there will be no excuse for not voting, because barring this week, we went through some of the stats. We'll go through them some more coming across the pipeline here, but we will. This is probably going to be a close election. Every vote is going to count, and if you're really sincere about wanting people like Donald Trump, like Peter Hernandez, to lead from presidency to your local areas, it starts like Peter said. I wasn't into this. I started for about half a dozen years ago. Well, about 10 years ago. I volunteered, got into it, got into the school board, ran for supervisor, run for that. And you know what? When the county health official tried to run a game on me, I questioned him back, and we saw who won that battle. But it takes getting in the ball game like this, and we are. All hands on deck. We got to get it done. Recall Gavin. We'll start the wave, taking back, making not only California, but America great again. We'll be back in the morning with IE Newswire Morning Report, where we do the straight news, and we'll be back here in 23 hours, where we give you the best news and commentary and guests that you won't find anywhere else. Till then, see ya!